channel dedicated to Ferra data models. Well, the new app has been released and it's got a lot of features, and you must go to the App Store and have a look at it. But today I want to discuss with you some of its simulation capabilities. I'm going to look at some scenarios specifically around pandemic virus simulations. So maybe let's start with some background. The model I'm going to be simulating is called a SIR model for susceptible, infected, and recovered. What happens in this model is an individual starts out as being susceptible to the disease. Then he comes into contact with the infected individual and the disease is transmitted. There's some probabilities at play here. And when he's infected after some time, he might either go into the deceased or the recovered category. There's some probabilities at play here. What's very important is the contact rate. Contact rate is the number of contacts that an individual has in this population times the probability of transmitting the disease. And that is used to calculate the number of newly infected individuals each simulation period, week in this case. That's very important. That's an extremely important variable, and it's also a dynamic one. It changes over time. So what I did was to simulate it in a number of ways, and I'll discuss those. But when I started out with this, I was thinking, how can I simulate this to be sort of reflect reality? So what I did was to use, let me just zoom this out a little bit. There we go. So what I did was to simulate the number of contacts per week using a Pareto distribution. This is a 80-20 type distribution. So 80% of the disease gets spread around by 20% of the people. This is what your typical contacts per week look like. The average here is at 5. So on average you have contact with 5 people during a week, but typically you have contact with very few people. But every now and again you have contact with a lot of people. Let's say you go to some meeting or you go to a shopping mall or something like that. So you normally have very little contact with people, but every now and again you have a lot of contact. And then I use this with a probability, with an average at 20% to simulate the probability of transmitting the disease. So there's a 20% that you will transmit the disease to somebody that you come into contact with, and on average you come into contact with 5 people. So per week in the baseline scenario, those who are infected transmit the disease to 1 other individual, which is fairly low. That's quite a conservative estimate. And but that's good because we want to see how fast this thing travels and how long it takes before it's worked out of the system. So we put a sort of to err on the low side of things. Okay, so this is what I did. In the end, this did not change much. I did many simulations, as I'll be discussing with you. This thing was dominating, if you want, and this is sort of the shape of the contact rate, where the contact rate is the product of the 2 random draws, one from this and one from this distribution. Okay, so let me show you some of the other assumptions. The population has 1 million people. So it's very easy to calculate percentages, although everything I'm going to show you will be already converted to percentages. Initially 10 people are infected, and because in the baseline I've got a contact rate of 1, it means that in the first week there's 10 infected. That's an assumption. The next week there's another 10 infected, because these have each infected 10 new people. So we've got 20 infected, then in the next week there's 20 infected, and so on. The recovery rate is 99.25%, so the fatality rate is 0.75%. I think that's about a category 3 pandemic. I've simulated for 52 weeks from 1st of January 2020 until the end of the year. So there's 52 contact periods that's being simulated. Then I've discussed this already. There's 20% chance of transmitting the disease, and you get in contact with 5 people, so you transfer this to 1 person per week in the baseline case. Then also there's one baseline, and in the alternatives I've simulated 100 alternatives. I would 100 times draw from the random distribution for 52 weeks and then just look at the outcome, just to eyeball it a bit. Other things I must mention is that it takes 3 weeks. It takes you 3 weeks to recover. After 3 weeks you are recovered, you move into this category. And when you are in the recovered category, you no longer get the disease. You develop immunity against it and you remain recovered. Or you go into the deceased category with a predetermined probability of 0.75% or 99.25% into the recovered category. Okay, so let's go back to the simulations. So first, let me show you the baseline outcome. So there's the baseline. In the baseline, there's no variance, right? It's just straightforward calculated. And if you look at the new calculation, the new infections, sorry. So in the first week, we start off with 10, right? Next week, that number jumps to 20. The week after that, it goes up to 40, right? The week after that, it goes to 80, almost 80. A certain portion of the population is now already infected, and they don't get infected again. So this sort of is why it's dropping. Although it's growing rapidly, it's also growing at a slightly slower pace. Right? The next week it goes to 150 more or less, not 160. Right? So that doesn't double again. It just goes to 150 because we've got 10 people, 10 of the initial week now move into the recovered category. Right? And so on. And there you can see the way in which this thing spreads. It has its maximum impact in terms of new infections around about the middle of the year, solstice it seems, and which in the southern hemisphere is the middle of winter, middle of cold and flu season. So that might be a problem. As you can see, this thing rises rapidly until this point, and then it falls off even quicker. It isn't symmetric; it falls off much quicker than it rises. In fact, and that's because there's simply nobody left to infect. Everybody's been infected, everybody's being moved into the recovered or deceased category, and there's nobody else to infect. So the thing sort of devours itself in this scenario. And then towards the end of the year, we're now in September, 600 new infections. There's almost nothing left of the disease. 66, yeah, I'm in October. 7 new infections. The thing has worked itself out. 2 new infections and just 1 infection in October. So the thing has worked itself out. Okay, so this is the baseline scenario, and in the baseline scenario, the contact rate is 1. The disease is transmitted to 1 other individual per week by those who are infected, and that remains constant. And this is what I want to vary in the alternatives. So we're going to look at some of the alternatives now. Sorry. Okay, so let's look at some alternatives. Done a lot of simulations. Let me just find the right report. Okay, so here are some alternatives. So, for example, there you see the baseline we looked at just now. We had its peak, it's about 20% of the population. Now let's say instead of with 10, we start with 20 people being infected at the outset. There's hardly any change. The thing moves up a little bit. Everything happens a bit quicker than in the baseline. But apart from that, if there's double the amount of people at the outset, there's hardly any difference. However, if we change the contact rate, it has a huge impact. Right? So here I've got a contact rate of 2. Remember, in the baseline, the contact rate is 1 person per week. Here it's 2 people per week. In this scenario, where there's 2 people infected per week, the thing rises rapidly, but then it falls even faster, and the whole thing is worked out in a month and a half. The whole thing is over by 1st of April because it has simply devoured itself. There's nobody else to infect, and and this is what happens. Of course, the cost of this is that 40% of the population gets sick at the same time. So a huge impact, but also works itself out rapidly. Now, to, as they say, flatten the curve, to bring this down, the problem is, of course, that instead of a month and a half, this now, in the baseline case, becomes, I don't know, 2, maybe 3 months, you know. So you have a huge storm. Let's say you've got a tornado for a month. Here you have a category 4 storm or something like that for 3 months. And here, as the contact rate goes down, this curve gets flattened quite a bit. So here we go from 2 to 1, then we go from 1 to 0.75. You only infect 0.75 people per week. And then if we drop that further to 0.5, this thing disappears. Nothing happens. Now the impact here is huge. It's thousands, if not millions of people, right? You can't see it, but it's there. However, everything gets pushed out into the next year. Nothing happens this year. It's so slow that you know, compared to these scenarios, it doesn't show anything. And I think this is what governments across the world are aiming for, to flatten this and even chopping it off completely, to eradicate it completely. And I do hope that succeeds. If not, then if not, then this thing's going to be with us for a long time, because this thing just extends into the next year and then sees the same kind of rapid increase. Okay, so I hope what you can see here is that the contact rate has a huge influence on the outcome of the model, and the contact rate also isn't constant. The contact rate varies over time. So what I did was to draw the contact rate from different distributions and simulate cases where the virus spreads under varying assumptions of contact rate. And as I said to you, what I did was to calculate the contact rate as the product of 2 random draws, one from a predictor to simulate the number of contacts you have per week, and one from a beta distribution to simulate the probability of transmission, and others. And I'll be discussing that with you now. Let me maybe just show you one of those just to give you an idea. Here, for example, I've used a uniform distribution. So just a uniform from 1 to 10 people. So you infect 1 to up to 11 people per week. And as you can see, it's pretty flat. It's a uniform distribution. 100 draws, so if those were more, it would be even more flat. But there you can see the outcome from a uniform distribution sample. And the contact rate is not the product of anything, it's just a uniform random number that gets drawn and used, right? And we'll look at the outcome of that and a few others. So, but let me get the report. There we go. Okay, so let's look at the new infection in these different scenarios. That uniform we looked at just now is much worse than the baseline. Is our baseline again about 20%. The uniform you see go up to 40%. This is about the same as the 2 contact ratio scenario. Contact rate scenario. So here we've got an exponential distribution. All right. And then we have the Pareto distribution, and we also have a beta plus Pareto distribution. Those two are almost on, they are basically on top of one another, basically insignificant here. Now this is the flattening of the curve. As you can see here, it went from 40% to 20%, and here let's say it's 10% for the exponential distribution, and much lower for the Pareto and beta plus Pareto. Now the nice thing about these ones, especially the Pareto, is that in my mind sort of simulates what happens in real life, right? Now these outcomes are without any government intervention. I've just rolled the dice and the outcomes came out. This is no clamping down on the contact rate. Let me, for example, show you the Pareto. If I can find it, here we go, right in front of me. Okay, so in this case, for example, the contact rate looks like this. It comes from a Pareto distribution. And 20% of the infections come from 80% come from 20% of the contact. So typically your distribution looks something like this. You have a lot of contact with the same people around you, but every now and again you, let's say, go to the mall, go to church, or go to the opera or something like that, and then you end up infecting a lot of people or getting infected at that function. So again, to me, this is a sort of real life scenario. And as you can see, this is the outcome of 100 different rolls of the dice. You can see this. Let's look at the new infections, for example. And here you can see the thing just never gets out of the blocks. Right? Remember, government doesn't intervene here. And it just doesn't take off. There are a couple of scenarios here, very few where it actually does seem to be affecting a lot of people. There towards the end, we've got one outcome where it's at around, I don't know, 12 or so million, But mostly, the new infections are pretty tame. Let's say, for example, here, the average new infections is at 5,000, right? So it looks, even without any intervention, we just look at normal human behavior. Yes, there's a huge problem, but this is manageable. Compared to the others where you have this contact rate stable at 1 or something like that, then you have trouble. Remember, I'm doing from a predictor here where the average is higher than 1, right? But even though the average is higher than 1, here, for example, we have an average of 1.01. In this month, we have an average of 1.022, right? So here we've got an average of 0.4. So every now and again there's a month with a low contact rate, a week with a low contact rate, and in the end those combine together to really keep the thing under control. Which is the same as we've seen in this report where we looked at the different contact rates. So every now and again we have a low contact rate outcome, or we have that a lot of the time in the simulation, but they combine so much so that in the end these things are flattened, if you want, dramatically. Without intervention, they actually do become quite flat if you vary this, as I've done here. Well, all of these things you can do with FTM, and it includes a nice SIR model if you want to play around with your own assumptions and your own numbers. Well, that's it. Thank you. Bye.